Welcome to the Misophonia podcast. This is season 6, episode 13. My name's Adil Ahmad, and I have misophonia. This week, I'm very excited to talk to Michael. Now, many of you may know Michael Lawrence if you're in his popular and active Facebook group, Misophonia Treatment Tracker. Michael has been pursuing treatment for his misophonia for over 40 years. He's got a wealth of knowledge and experience, and obviously he's had a lot of time to think about this condition and its effects on minds, bodies, and relationships. We talk about a lot of stuff in this fascinating conversation. Obviously, his origin story, his family life growing up, and marriages since then. We get into primal therapy, internal family systems, memory reconsolidation, polyvagal work, epigenetics, and even how he uses ketamine now. And he's got many great book recommendations at the end. I really can't do it justice with this lame little intro, so I want to just get right into it. A couple of quick things, though. Remember, as always, nothing here is medical advice. Always consult a professional before trying anything. Also, as always, I remove as many of our little mouth sounds and triggers as I can during editing. There are like hundreds, but here there's a couple minutes near the beginning where there's a dog barking in the background. The discussion was too good for me to pause right away, but eventually we got things taken care of, so 99% of the interview is all good. Of course, please, if you enjoyed the interview, leave a quick rating in your podcast app, and it will help get this heard by more people like us. Hit me up on Instagram or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast, Twitter at Misophonia Show, or email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com. All those links are in the show notes. Thanks again to our Patreon supporters for helping with hosting and recording of the show. You can contribute there at patreon.com/misophoniapodcast. And all right, here, without further ado, is my conversation with Michael. Michael, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you here.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So, yeah. Do you want to tell us, just kind of, I guess, roughly kind of where you're located and I guess what you do?
Okay, I'm retired. I've been retired about 15 years. I live in Arizona. I live in Phoenix area during the cooler months, and I live up in the mountains a couple hours away in Prescott during the summertime, so I don't have to endure that unbelievable heat down there. So you get the best of both worlds here.
Yeah, for sure. Great. Okay. And yeah, you were asking me earlier if I have misophonia. I believe you have misophonia as well, right? You're kind of a somewhat of a well-known figure in the community.
You know, I've had groups for a number of years, Facebook groups. So depending on what treatment I have, I start a group up for that treatment, like neurofeedback or whatever I was into at the time. Right now, I guess about 4 years ago, I started a group called the Misophonia Treatment Tracker, and that was just general, and I wanted to see what other people were doing and if it was working or not working and track whatever treatments were going on. But it ended up kind of like more of my own treatment being
let's continue, I guess. Hopefully everything's okay on your end, internet wise. And so let's say you were talking about right, you were talking about how you've had a bunch of communities over the years, and the latest one, the Treatment Tracker group, which that's where I've heard about you from a number of people. That was meant to kind of track different people's treatments, but you've been kind of like, I guess, documenting your own search. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I enjoy learning, because this is just taken over my life. I've had it for over 60 years. So it has dominated my life, and it's affected my career choices. It affected all of my relationships with my, wives and children and friends and social activities and my extended family. It affects everything. It affects how you deal with the world. It makes you more of a, I'm an introvert, but I enjoy being around people, and I do, enjoy conversation and company. But I have had to limit that at times, and I tend to isolate myself more than I would have otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
because just to avoid the stress. It has affected my life tremendously. So it's about 10 years ago I found out that it had a name, and there were people, investigating it and looking into treatments and trying to see what they could do about it. I started, actually, let me see, if I'm 70, I was about 50, so about 40 years ago I started my first treatments. I moved to 1984. I moved to Los Angeles so I could go to primal therapy. You might be familiar with Arthur Janov and primal scream therapy.
I've heard of Primal Scream, but could you talk about that a bit more? It seems like a cool early 80s trend
Yeah,
for
it was actually
therapy.
70s and 80s. He wrote the book in
Yeah.
1969, and I eventually moved out there so I could go to primal therapy, and it was really good. It was very helpful. You go back to your childhood and you try to relive the painful experiences and incorporate them, resolve them. And it was very helpful. It's still, a part of my life. And I still think it's a helpful therapy, but it didn't help me particularly with the misophonia. This thing has been so difficult to deal with. And then I lived in Los Angeles, and then I heard about somebody about 10 years ago. I heard about neurofeedback helping somebody. Marcia Johnson, who's, over
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
misophonia group, she had a Yahoo group, and she had someone on there that talked about going to a neurofeedback practitioner in Iowa. So I tried for about 2 years. I lived in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I went to 4 or 5 different practitioners there of neurofeedback. And then I ended up going to one in Wyoming, one in California. And I finally went and moved for a year and a half to Iowa to go to this particular neurofeedback doctor who apparently helped this guy completely get rid of his symptoms. And I spent a year and a half there and a whole bunch of money, and it did nothing.
Wow.
So I came back home with my tail between my legs and started some new ideas. Holistic. I had a holistic treatment. I did vitamin therapy. They test you and find out what you're missing and what vitamins you're missing. That didn't work. I went to Utah. I saw another doctor. They did all kinds of testing and they gave me all kinds of supplements. And I did that. I still do a lot of those supplements, but it did not help. And then what else did I do? The GAPS diet, which is gut health, and this is horrible diet where you eat almost nothing and you're starving
Mm-hmm.
all the time. And it was supposed to help get toxins out of the brain, and that didn't work. And then I was kind of about to give up, but I kept reading and I kept finding new things, so I continued with different treatments. And then about 10 years ago, what's the latest one? And then I thought it had to do with brain inflammation, so I continued with diet and all of those things, and none of those worked. And then this doctor, you may have heard of Dr. Hatch in Utah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He's a functional neurologist, really nice
Right.
guy. So I made 3 trips up to see him, and came home with the exercises and did them over and over again. Nothing. so
Mm-hmm.
so I
Mm-hmm.
think I kind of gave up for a little while, and then I started to investigate. I don't know how one thing led to another. Um, anyway, I think it was Chris Pearson, and he had the SRT, sequent repatterning. You may have heard of that.
Yeah. Pattern resequencing or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. I'll find it and put a link in.
Yeah. Well, that brought a bunch of things in. Anyway, I ended up working with one of the practitioners, Morven Sermon, in Scotland, and I still work with her. We
Mm-hmm.
do this over the computer, and she's wonderful, and it's really helped. And we're mostly doing IFS. internal family systems. Are you familiar?
Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah, so that's sorry to cut in, but is it that's the idea of it's not your family. It's
Right, right.
the parts of you or person. Well, I don't want to say personality. The parts of
No.
your mind. There's like a firefighter. There's
Yeah,
the wounded child.
things
Then there's the
exactly.
executive, something like that. Yeah, if you could explain that, I find that
It's
fascinating.
absolutely fascinating. It was developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz, and he has a number of books. And he found that we all have subpersonalities. We have our true self, which is the, the part that's unchanging. It never, it's always there. It's the calm, creative
Hmm.
part that we tend to lose when we grow up in any kind of situation that causes us stress or a traumatic situation that we have to change ourselves in some way to get our needs met. If we're not, I'm not saying everybody that has misophonia has had serious trauma, that's not the case. But apparently, we have all had stresses and we've all had things in our life that have caused us to develop different personalities, uh, create different subpersonalities, like a protector part. You dig down into the past and find the parts of you that have been hurt. We'll just talk about what's going on in the present. And you find that there are many parts within you that are helping you to function. And when you were growing up, when you were young, say for instance, you weren't being held or paid attention to, or you felt that your brother or sister was being favored over you, and you start to create different little personalities to protect you in some way, to get your needs met.
Hmm.
When you feel trapped or helpless and that you don't have someone there to support you, you create a personality of some type to protect that wounded part. And it does. We all do it. Anyway, it's a fascinating science, and it takes time, and we slowly peel back the layers and find the deeper wounded parts. That's what we've been doing here lately, and befriend them. They were not protected at the time. They needed someone there to support them, and these parts, we find who they are, talk to them, listen to what they have to say, and then give them the support they need and the love, and hear them out, and help to resolve that past hurt. And when they're heard and they feel like they can trust you and that you're supporting them, they slowly heal, and the healing process goes on and continues on. It's a very popular treatment method, and it's the one that I'm mostly doing. And
Well, yeah.
go ahead.
Has it? So obviously you're doing it for the obviously the purpose of trying to heal misophonia, and something that comes up on the podcast a lot is stories from folks' childhood of their having to be walking on eggshells for some sort of chaotic situation happening at home. um, and this, it seems like uh, a good potential therapy for that kind of situation where a lot of us have had something that happened, not maybe not everybody, but something in the past or periods of the past where there was like a walking on eggshells moment or a situation or years. It sounds like it is a theory here that as you're working with these doctors, that healing that wounded child will help you not be, you know, react to sounds as kind of a danger.
Well, that's the whole thing. I
Yeah.
think this condition develops when we don't feel safe.
Yeah.
when, as a child, it's learned either explicitly or implicitly. It's learned, especially by the our autonomic nervous system, or when our brain is developing, we learn how
Mm-hmm.
to survive. And if we don't feel safe, when we're not always comforted, when we're frightened, or when we feel our boundaries have been violated, or so many little things that can create this kind of situation, then we get into a fight or flight or freeze
Mm-hmm.
mode. And I
Mm-hmm.
think because when we were young, we didn't feel safe at times. If it could be chronic stress, it could be particularly chronic unpredictable stress that apparently can cause inflammation in the body and the brain, which can exacerbate whatever symptoms we have. And it also just keeps the nervous system, ramped up and
Agitated. Yeah.
agitated. And when we don't feel safe and comfortable, and this autonomic nervous system is turned up to be always on the lookout for potential threats, we hear everything. Our ears perk up. We're hearing all the sounds. Our eyes are looking out for threats. And I just think we're just basically looking out for threats because we don't internally feel safe. And it's all about
Yeah.
safety and survival. And when our needs are met, when somebody, always, and no matter how much a parent loves their child, they're never going to always be there for them. They're never always going to show up when they're scared or when they need them. We do the best we can as parents.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think we just get kind of stuck in this fight or flight mode, and we just pick up on potential threats. It's just the way the unconscious brain works. It's survival brain, and it's always looking out for potential threats. So the key is to try to calm the nervous system down, deal with the past, try to resolve those things, but at the same time, the other approach is to try to calm down the nervous system, and I do that. I've been incorporating yoga and mindfulness, and certainly a lot of exercise, and anything that helps you to feel safe and calm. Deep breathing, particularly slow, deep breathing, and strengthening the vagus nerve. I'm sure the vagus nerve has come up,
Mm-hmm.
polyvagal theory has come
Mm-hmm.
up, and they all work
Yeah.
together. They're all part of the same thing. They're all ways of calming down your body and your response. If you can calm down your body, then you won't be quite as responsive. So if you try to calm down the body, and at the same time you're doing a top-down approach, which is to deal with what's going on in your brain. I'm sure you're also familiar with the term memory reconsolidation.
Right. Yeah.
This is IFS is a form of memory reconsolidation. We're bringing up the past, bringing it out into the consciousness, changing it, showing the unconscious brain that it's safe now. You're in control. You're an adult. You're not 2 years old or 5 years old. Because when I do the IFS with Morven, I'm 3, 4, 5 years old. I'm this little part of me that's 3 or 4 that's scared. Nobody's coming to help me,
Mm-hmm.
and I now as an adult come in there and take over the role of hearing, protecting, listening, and helping that little scared part that is triggered by sights or sounds, and calm him down and hope that he will learn that everything's safe now, in the hopes of not having my response be so extreme.
This is fascinating. And like you said, you know, everyone's kind of dealing with something like this. In your discussions with the people you're working with, is there any idea of something different about what we experienced growing up that kind of puts us over the edge, or maybe we're more susceptible somehow to to having to create these subpersonalities to protect ourselves? That's kind of the second layer I'm kind of fascinated by, is if this such kind of if everyone has a kind of common experience growing up. Parents try to, obviously love us, but there's always something that happens at some point. I'm just always wondering if there's something different about how we um, react at that age.
That's a great question, and it's one that I've been discussing because lately I've really been. And this is what I always thought from the beginning, and then I got sidetracked into other ideas. But I really think it has to do with the trauma and stress. And when I say trauma in the group, people go, "No, my child had no trauma, or I had no trauma in my life." Everyone experiences trauma to some degree. It could be a
It's a loaded term. I've experienced that as well.
yeah.
It's a yeah.
Well, all the science is heading in that direction, that there's something that happened.
Yeah.
Some of us may have a predisposition, we may even have a genetic
Mm-hmm.
predisposition, but most of the brain wiring happens after we're born, during our life, and certain stressors and trauma, they could be very mild trauma. It could be implicit and
There's a small T trauma as a term as
that
well, which
that's
is, I
that's
think, more what you're just.
yeah,
Yeah.
it could just be the small ones. It could be that your parent favored one child over the other, and you just got the message
Mm-hmm.
that I'm not lovable, they're more lovable than me, and it's painful, and that's trauma. That's plenty of trauma. There's so many traumas that can happen. I mean, you have a surgery, you have a major infection, all of those
Mm-hmm.
things are traumatic, and they can set this thing in motion as well. But I think most of the time it's the emotional traumas, the little situations in our life, in our family, with our parents and our siblings that that seem minor, but I tell you, when you go back and you're 4 or 5 years old, the little things that you look at now and you think, boy, that's not such a big deal. When you're 5 years old again and you're emotionally feeling that, they're huge, they're
These
tremendous.
sessions have to be. These sessions have to be. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. They must be pretty intense and emotional, right? When you're working with your, like, even now when you're going back to that time, I would imagine that it must be.
Yeah,
You must.
yeah, they can be
It must
very
be
emotional,
pretty heavy.
very,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
emotional. I do a lot of crying. I sit in front of my computer and
Yeah.
and talk
Yeah.
talk to this wonderful woman in Scotland. And when I go back to being that little child again and feeling the hurt, feeling I was humiliated, violated, not being
Yeah.
loved, not being given attention, not being heard, all these little things, less, being less favored from either my brother or my sister or whatever. Those things are huge when you're little. And when, the primitive brain will do anything to survive. And when it feels like the unconscious brain will think, oh, I'm not loved, I'm going to be abandoned, I'm going to starve to death, I'm going to die. It doesn't, it's not a cognitive brain. This is a primitive brain, and it experiences things on that deep emotional level. And they are huge feelings. And I was just thinking about the ways we deal with anger and rage. That's such a big part of
Mm.
misophonia. And I was listening to somebody today talk about it. And there's three ways we deal with it. One is to act it out, scream and yell, punch, hit somebody, whatever, which we don't usually do. It's not socially acceptable. Or we suppress it, which is what most of us do. We suppress it. But there's a third way, which is to experience it. And one practice that I've incorporated is mindfulness, seeing yourself, feeling yourself. Mindfulness is not just sitting there and being blissful. It's experiencing all of the feelings, being very aware of them, feeling how tense your body is, how angry you are, and actually stepping away from yourself and seeing what's learning to be comfortable with these physical and emotional states. And if you can become more comfortable with them, that's what mindfulness is. It's one way of doing it. Sitting with it in the moment, becoming comfortable, it's not as threatening, and you learn to have more control over it. You're not acting it out, you're not suppressing it, you're actually feeling it and experiencing it, but you're learning to deal with it in a better way. And that's another approach I take, which is a mindful approach. And
You're talking about taking the mindful approach as your experience and trigger, or is this kind of like
it, it's
some other time when you're just trying to be more in touch with your mind.
Yeah, it's a practice that a lot of these things require a lot of time and energy and effort.
Because when we're being triggered, like logic is out the window. So I'm just curious if you've made it to the point where you are able to kind of like pause in the middle of a trigger and catch yourself and try to be more mindful. That would be amazing.
I certainly do a lot of deep breathing when I
Mm-hmm.
feel
Mm-hmm.
triggered, and I try to step away, almost like observing myself suffering.
Yeah.
You can suffer.
Yeah.
Suffering is not the hard part. You can suffer, but it's learning how to be suffering, learning how to live and be comfortable with those feelings, and learning that they're not going to kill you. The more comfortable you are, the less out of control, the less control they have over you. And that's all part of mindfulness. So this is,
And when you are trying to be mindful in the moment, are you also maybe blending it with the IFS work? Of maybe are you thinking about that subpersonality, or is it a separate thing?
I think that's really separate. I think they kind of
Mm-hmm.
overlap at times, but it's more of a practice that you do. You know, I just set aside time. It's like set aside 10, 20, 15 minutes, whatever. Be mindful and listen to your body, listen to your thoughts. Let them come and go, and don't respond to them. Don't repress them. Don't be afraid of them. Feel them, experiencing them, and be in control of what's going on. And it makes a difference, but it's a practice. It has to be something you do on a regular basis.
Right. And as you've been doing this practice, I don't know how long you've been doing either these, the mindfulness or the IFS. Are you noticing a change yet, or is it you just feel like it's in the right direction? And
It's in the right direction. It's
mm-hmm.
not a quick fix. None of the things I'm doing
Mm.
at this point are
All
are
right.
a quick fix. We all want the panacea. We all want the quick fix, but there isn't one. And another thing I'm doing is ketamine. Have you been familiar with the resurgence of psychedelic medicines?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So that's funny when you mentioned the quick fix. A friend of mine had emailed me who doesn't have misophonia, but his wife does, and he just asked me, "Isn't there like a psychedelic drug we can just take?" So yeah, I'd love to hear what you're thinking about because I am curious. Yeah.
Yeah, I just started this recently. There's a company called Mind Bloom. I started it.
Oh yes, it's a startup. I think right on the West Coast, I believe. If it's the same one I'm thinking
Where
about,
are they? I think they're in Rhode Island or
it's like a
something.
microdosing kind of. Oh, okay, yeah.
Exactly. And all of a sudden, well, the people that I listened to, the guy who developed IFS, this is where I started it.
Mm-hmm.
The guy who developed
Mm.
Schwartz, who developed IFS, uh, Gabor Mate, who's
Oh yeah.
trauma expert, brilliant guy. If you ever
Yep.
want to learn more about misophonia, check out his videos on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
I highly recommended that, and
oh, you have, huh?
I highly recommend.
Oh,
Well,
how?
yeah. So that was actually recommended to me from another misophonia therapist,
Oh,
and that
really?
just blew my mind. That just introduced me to kind of this whole world of multi trauma and IFS and the body keeps a score,
Yeah,
and yeah, I've been kind of just soaking all that stuff up like a sponge.
good. Me too. It's fascinating, especially if you have misophonia and you want to learn why you have it and how to try to
It's the
fix it.
first thing that really clicked for me. Yeah, I mean, I was like, I'm reading this stuff, watching these videos, thinking about my past. I'm like, oh, okay, now it's finally something starting to make sense. So,
That's great. That's
um,
great because I really believe you're on the right track, and I believe I'm finally on the right track.
hmm
And particularly Gabor Mate is brilliant, and
yeah,
he's got a million videos, and he's got wonderful books. And
fellow Canadian too.
oh, I didn't know that.
So,
Yeah, he is. And anyway, he's the one who stresses that so many of these physical and mental disorders that we suffer with have to do with trauma, not extreme trauma. I mean, he grew up in Hungary at the end of the during the Holocaust, at the end of World War II, and it wasn't him. He was an infant, but he suffered from abandonment. His mother had to give him away to save his life, at least temporarily. But
hmm
he picked up on all of her stress, And that's how, my mother had misophonia, and I picked up on all of her triggers and stress, and I tried to protect
Oh.
her from the sounds. And it's a complex thing for me. And my daughter has misophonia, and she picked up on it from me. She learned it from me. She had a lot of
Mm-hmm.
stress growing up with a father with misophonia, and problems in the marriage and all, and it was very difficult to have a parent with misophonia, and you tend to pick up
Mm-hmm.
on it. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. But Gabor Mate has talked about how trauma is behind the majority of these conditions. Unfortunately, misophonia yet has not fit in there, but I'm sure in time it'll fit in with the ADHD
Right.
and anxiety, depression, and so many other PTSD. They all have similar origins, and they all have similar methods of trying to fix them and heal from them. But I've been discussing
So yeah,
I've been discussing trauma a lot in my group, and a lot of people, a
yeah.
lot of mothers are like, no, I don't want to hear it. My child had no trauma, but it's not quite the same trauma that you're thinking of, and it's a much more subtle thing. And but I really believe trauma and particularly chronic unpredictable stress in the home, in the family situations, um, they cause us to respond the way we are. They put us into this state of fight and flight. We don't feel safe. We don't have a predictable world, and our senses are heightened. And so we start picking up on sounds. I mean, it's not just chewing, it's dogs barking, it's clocks ticking, it's rapid movements, all the things. My senses are just hyped up.
Yeah. And speaking of senses, I want to get back to the microdosing
Oh, yeah, sorry.
psychedelic stuff, but I no, that's fine. Like I said, I love tangents, but there was one thought there that I was thinking about recently. How like why hearing, why sounds. I was just thinking that because we have visual triggers. I'm sure you have probably visual triggers as well,
Yeah,
and some people have sound feelings and not like touch and whatnot.
right.
I'm wondering. I was just thinking that sound is kind of the hardest. At least for me, I think it's the hardest one to block away. Like you can close your eyes and avoid
Yeah,
visual triggers.
yeah,
Obviously, touching, you can just be by yourself, taste and smell. You can hold your nose, but you can hold your ears, but that's not going to completely block away sounds. And I feel like maybe it's the first
exactly.
leg that falls, and then the other ones kind of come in. I feel like it's bigger than, it's not just a sound sensitivity. It goes deeper than that. And I feel like this idea, the nervous system and trauma, these aren't specific to sounds. And I feel like hopefully the understanding will change to beyond just the sound sensitivity, and maybe we can kind of get to the root problem, which I think you're alluding to.
I just think when we don't feel safe, especially as a child, and
Yeah.
our brain is developing, we pick up, we just pick up on that, and we learn to be on guard for. I used to think there were monsters under my bed and in my closet and stuff. I didn't feel safe. Some of that's normal,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
we all have a certain amount of survival instincts that kick in. But we don't have the uh, olfactory senses that a dog has. They would probably use scent more than sound, but we don't. And so sound is probably the one that's the most salient, that sticks out and we pick up on. So I think our hearing is our greatest source of first line survival.
Yeah. So getting back to drugs, um, what? Yeah, fascinated by the idea of psychedelics, microdosing. What are you? What can you say you're trying, and what have you heard? What are you most interested in
Well,
there?
the only thing I've been doing is ketamine. There are
Hmm.
other ones. I mean, a lot of them. All the mushrooms are becoming popular, and there's a lot of psychedelics, microdosing, and some not so micro that people are doing. And
Yeah.
this one in particular was recommended. If you go on YouTube or read any of their books, Gabor Mate, Schwartz with the IFS, Some of the other ones, they discuss it. You can see it on YouTube, but they discuss it. I think Stephen Porges too with polyvagal theory. They're
Mm.
finding that this really helps facilitate the process. It helps with depression, anxiety, PTSD, and key in IFS work is to bring out your authentic true self, which tended to be pushed to the side because these other subparts had to show up to protect you. And something about these psychedelics, they help to bring out your true self. They help the self, the authentic self that was kind of lost in the process of protection, to bring it out to the fore. And ketamine does that. Other psychedelics do that. It also helps rewire the brain. It facilitates and speeds up that process of breaking old neural connections that aren't working well
Mm.
and making new ones. That's what memory reconsolidation is all about. That's what IFS is trying to do. So anything that'll help move that process along quicker is helpful. So Dr. Schwartz discussed it in his book. So I thought, okay, I'll check into this. And then I found Mind Bloom, and I did them for a little while. But then I happened to find a doctor who does online medicine, and
Mm-hmm.
I see him every month. He's $250 for a visit for about half an hour, whatever. He prescribes the ketamine. It doesn't cost much. It's only like $60, $70 for 10 doses. So I get 10 doses. I take it every 3 days. And it's a magnificent experience. I really enjoy the experience. And
Mm-hmm.
I cover so much during this experience. I put um, sleep mask on. I put on my
Mm-hmm.
headphones, and I have this wonderful meditation type music. And I lay back. I'm on a recliner, and I take it. It takes
Mm-hmm.
about 15 minutes to start kicking in, and it lasts about an hour and a half, about. And I go back and to my past. I go through my life. It's a very spiritual experience. A lot of my understanding of God and my spiritual relationship with God and with myself, my inner spirit, they're all touched on. And it leaves me wanting to always be a better person, to be a good person, to do the best I can with this life that I've been given. And it also it takes me to parts where I go back to the work I'm doing with the IFS. I go back to being this young child who's wounded, and I delve into those areas. And in an hour and a half, sometimes I feel like I've lived an entire lifetime by the time I come out of it.
Wow.
And then one of the important things about psychedelics is having support, built a support system, but having some trained therapist that you're working with that can help you to process what's been going on, what happened during the experience, and process the experience, not just having a crazy psychedelic experience, but taking out what you learn and using it and processing it and absorbing it and making sense of it and using it in a positive way in your life. So you can't just take them and just go on a trip all by yourself. You need support. You need hopefully trained therapist who understands a little bit about this. And at least I know when I'm doing the IFS with Morgan, we can discuss what's going on, what happened, and treat those wounded parts like I have been doing, and what they're doing. They're not all wounded parts; they're protective parts. They do a lot of complicated things, but trying to understand what's going on with them. So it's a helpful thing. It's been kind of pretty life changing, really.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, that's
And I
huge.
do it every 3 days now. It's not expensive. It costs me about $300 a month, and that's about $30 a session. And
Mm-hmm.
that is a lot of people were doing intravenously and end up paying about $200 a session. So or more,
Yikes! Yeah,
or more.
that's intense.
And I
Yeah.
love the fact that I can take it orally. They're just lozenges that dissolve under your tongue, and you can do it at the safety of your home. You don't have to worry about driving anywhere or having a driver to take you home because you can't drive afterwards. So I found a way to use the psychedelics in a safe, cost-effective manner and use them in a positive way, along with all the other things that I'm doing. But
And so when you say you do the when you do the doses, you don't have a professional there with you. It's more like you next time you see them, you can talk about what you went through. Maybe do you keep a journal
I do.
while you're going through this
I
experience?
have a
Yeah.
journal.
Okay.
It's hard to read my handwriting, but I do have a journal,
Yeah.
and I
Same.
and I do have support. I always have my wife. She ends up coming down, and I talk to her afterwards. I kind of like being alone. There's nothing she can do while I'm going through this. I'm just in my own world for an
Mm.
hour and a half. But having her to be there, hold me, listen to me what I have to say, feel loved, feel support. That's a really important part of this. And then I have weekly sessions with Morgan and on the computer. So I do feel like I have a support system. I talk about it a lot in the group, but I don't think anybody else out in the group is doing it. I've kind of thought of starting a group. There are groups for people who are doing psychedelics, but nothing related to misophonia. So maybe eventually there will be.
Hey, I'd be interested in that. I mean, yeah, I feel like not enough people are talking about the whole, the Gabriel, the Gabriel Mate's is circle of sphere of, um, past trauma and, connected to misophonia. And this is also, I feel like it's part of that sphere. I feel like yeah, I mean, all this IFS, all this stuff I think should be
It,
explored
it, it
more.
all it all makes sense. It makes sense to
I'll be
you,
the
right?
first person in that group.
Yeah,
Yeah, it does. It
it
does.
does.
Yeah.
Intuitively, you know it. Didn't you feel like at some point you had this? It had something to do with your childhood and some past
I knew
hurts.
immediately. I knew immediately it had to do with when my dad would flip out if we misplaced something in the house, and
Mm,
we would have to be. We didn't know. I'd be listening very carefully, like what mood is he in? What floor is he on?
yeah,
Am I searching? Am I looking around enough?
yeah.
In my
Boy,
room.
you're perfect for you.
So
You're describing exactly why somebody would have this condition. You are absolutely
yeah,
describing it. I had an alcoholic father who, not physically abusive, but verbally and emotionally and unpredictable. And he
hmm
got extremely
yep.
drunk. And my mother drank with him, so she was not there to protect me. So that was a not a safe environment to grow up with a mother who's
hmm
kind of out of it, not even aware of you, and the father who got meaner and meaner as the evening progressed, and it was almost every night as I got older, and a very
Yeah.
unsafe, unpredictable, stressful place to grow up in and then with my mother having it as well, I was a perfect candidate to pick this thing up.
I think you mentioned something about siblings. What was their kind of, how did they fit into this? Were they also experiencing the same things you were? Did they end up getting misophonia as well?
That they're a key part of it. My first trigger was
Mm,
my brother. Or a typical night would be my parents would go into the living room, they would drink, and my
mm,
brother and sister and I have a loving family. I love my brother and sister. I've always had friction with my father, but he's no longer around, or my mother. But you know, they loved us. They just had a bit of a drinking problem that I think made things unsafe for me. And I'm sorry, I lost your. Oh, and my brother and sister. My brother, my younger brother, 4 or 5 years younger, he was my first trigger, and it was just unbearable when he chewed with his mouth open. It was just
mm-hmm,
drove me
mm-hmm,
nuts, and I sat right next to him growing up, watching, eating dinner every night, and my sister didn't wasn't a trigger so much unless she was chewing gum or chewing on candy or something. She became a trigger, but it was mainly my brother, and I just remember it. We've gone back there. And then a lot of the situations that went on, I felt like my brother came along. I didn't get as much attention. I was the middle child. I was kind of the whipping boy from my father.
Mm,
I took the brunt of all this frustration and anger for the longest time.
mm,
My sister always got straight A's. She did everything right. My brother was the little cute little baby that couldn't do anything wrong, and here I was the one in
mm,
the middle that took the brunt of everything, and I played that role. Somebody had to take his. It's a dysfunctional family, so somebody has to make. My role in making the family function was to take all of his stress and anger and take it onto
mm.
myself, and I became the whipping boy of the family. That was the role I had, and you carry that the rest of your life. You learn that, and you continue to be that way. So something I've had to try to overcome over time.
How did that yeah, how did you carry that forward, like, even in other family situations, like with your own family, or is just uh, family get-togethers with your growing up family, like you're still as an adult being mentally abused?
Um, I think it just affected my self-esteem,
Yeah, yeah,
my
yeah, gotcha. Yeah.
self-esteem, my ability to. I was very ambitious and productive, and I was always driven, and I was always doing things. But
Mm-hmm.
uh, I know that sense of feeling not good enough, not lovable,
Mm-hmm.
unimportant, less important, and then being always anxious about it. They affected how I acted and probably how I was as a father and how I was as a husband. They certainly didn't have a positive effect. They had a
Yeah.
negative effect.
Did so I'm yeah, I guess I'm assuming you, well, at least definitely probably before, at least before you knew you had a name, you were probably there's probably just a lot of reactions and just not a lot of confusion and not knowing how to deal with it.
Yeah, it was only 10 years ago when I found out this had a name.
Yeah.
Before that, I knew my mother had it, so I knew somebody had it. And I just thought, well, I picked it
Yeah.
up from my mother, and there's something wrong with me. And I've spent a lifetime going to different therapies trying to figure out what's wrong with me and trying to fix it.
Yeah. Did you have other comorbid situations conditions that you would go to see doctors about? And did you ever get misdiagnosed for other things rather than misophonia?
Yeah, just general anxiety
Yeah, yeah.
and a mild depression. I was never really deeply depressed. I stayed too busy and was too getting too much exercise. Or I dealt with it when I was young by drinking and smoking pot.
Mm,
When I was real young, and then I stopped doing that, and then I just became an exercise bicycle addict, an exercise addict, and that
yeah.
it is an addiction for me. I mean, it's very addictive, and it's the way I found that would calm down the anxiety. If I don't exercise, I do get
Mm,
depressed. So I think I don't even
mm,
know how depressed I would be because I'm always exercising. So maybe I would be a
yeah.
depressed person. I know my father was, but maybe I would have depression if I didn't do the constant exercise. You know, morning, afternoon, and evening. I do exercise.
Gotcha. Yeah. And how did it affect? Oh, so many, so many different ways we can go. How did it affect? Yeah, like career choices you said earlier on. Like, what kind of jobs did you end up taking or quitting?
That's a good question because I ended up becoming a chef when I was young. So
Mm,
I'd be in the
mm-hmm.
kitchen around food all the time, which was insane. So that didn't last too long. It lasted for a while. I moved to Las Vegas, worked in the hotels, and then I had to get out of that. So I also loved gardening, so I went back to school and became a landscaper, and I did
Mm,
landscaping for a number of years, and eventually um, evolved into real estate investing. So I did that for the better part of my adult career, adult life. So anything to avoid being in an office, being stuck in a situation that I couldn't escape. I always had to deal
mm-hmm.
with some of it, but I had to do things that would keep me out of a situation where I would have to deal with people eating, to minimize it anyway.
Yeah. So it was really, yeah, even long before I had a name, this was really the overarching known issue in your life. And you knew it was a thing. A lot of us assume, like you said, like where, we just have an extreme pet peeve or something. But for you, you knew that it was much more than that, and it was special, and not special, but it was its own thing that just didn't have a name at the time.
Yeah, I didn't have a name for it. All I know, like I said, my mother had it. I have it. It doesn't make any sense. It's crazy. Maybe if I go, and even all these top therapists I went to, really, really smart people who deal with all kinds of problems, they didn't have a name for it. They really didn't understand it. I was not the only patient that showed up at primal therapy with this problem, because other people have had it. And
that's back in the 80s, right?
No,
Even
back
in the
70s and 80s. Yeah,
70s.
Actually,
wow.
I went in the 80s. It started in the 70s.
Yeah.
But I found out that other people who had this same problem, my situation, my mother used to say that when she finally did admit that she had this, she said, well, my father scared me. We'd sit at the dinner table. He would make a lot of noise when we ate. And he was just always, I was always afraid of him. He was, he wasn't, I didn't know that part of him. He died when I was young, but she was afraid of him. She was kind of a nervous, slightly timid person. And then there was a girl that came to primal therapy, and this one was much more extreme. Her father would take her in the back room, sexually molest her, come back into the dinner table. The mother would act like nothing was going on, ignore it, and she sat there and couldn't stand the sound of her father's eating. So I think there's a connection there to the little bit of a trauma or a traumatic situation or a stress.
Yeah.
In some of these situations, it's extreme. Some it's not.
That's horrible.
But my case was not extreme like that. But it was an uncomfortable situation, I know.
But it was enough, to tip it over.
It doesn't take much, especially if you're a highly sensitive person. I'm sure you're familiar with the HSP. Yeah,
I was going to bring that up at some point too. Yeah. Can you tell me about that? Yeah, I guess I debate with myself a lot. Am I that? Because it would explain a lot, but I wonder about that.
I've told the group before about the HSP and other people as well, and I'm familiar with Dr. Aaron's books, and I am definitely an HSP. I'm a highly sensitive person. I'm sensitive by nature. I mean, I cry easily. I'm very empathetic. Little things affect me. Some little slight that somebody will say or whatever. It'll keep me from sleeping half the night. I'm just sensitive to sound. I'm sensitive to just about anything, and that it's a two-edged sword. It can be good, but it can also make life a little difficult for you. But I think it's just my opinion. I have never taken a poll or anything, but I think the majority of people with misophonia tend to be HSPs, tend to be highly sensitive people.
Yeah, a lot of us have even labeled ourselves as such. So I figure there's even many more that don't know it would definitely be on the spectrum if it's a spectrum.
Yeah, it probably is a spectrum. It probably is. I don't know if there's a gene. Yeah. I don't know if there's a gene that makes us that way. I don't know if it's ever been discussed. But I just posted something recently there's a couple of genes. I put it in the group that I found a book I'm reading that they found a couple of genes that make people more susceptible to more sensitive. There are a couple of them, and when you have that gene and you also have a situation where you have trauma or stress, you're much more likely that epigenetically switch on that gene that will.
Yeah, I was going to say epigenetics is something I've heard a lot here as well, where it's not like you're 100% predisposed to something happening like the color of your skin, but it's more if they're under the right conditions, it could definitely you're more susceptible.
Right.
Which is
right. Yeah. It's just waiting for some environmental situation to trigger it and for that gene to switch on. Because I was just listening to Gabor Mate say that very few of these conditions are actually genetic, that they're actually in the genes and in the DNA sequence. They are just switched on by situations and in the environment, and they can be passed on. Even the epigenetic tendencies can be passed on, through generations, but it's not actually in the genes themselves. It's more of a switch on or switch off, depending on your environment, your whatever goes on in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Switching back to something you said earlier, you said when your mom finally admitted that she had it. Can you talk about that? Like, how did you tell her? Did you tell her? Did you guys find out about the name together? I'm just curious how that conversation went and how she maybe reluctantly admitted that she had it.
Another very good question. I went to primal therapy. I told you that it was back in 1984. I sold my house. I was living in Las Vegas at the time. I sold my house and moved to Los Angeles to be close to the Primal Institute in Los Angeles. And I was explaining to them why I was selling my house and moving to another city and going to this therapy, primal therapy. And I just said it was about the sounds and the eating. And it's something I grew up hearing my mother say, chew with your mouth closed. And, I could see her squirm and make comments about other people's eating. I knew she had it. She just was too embarrassed to admit it. To admit it to me, especially when she found out I had it. I think she just felt so bad that she denied it at first. And then finally, I wasn't trying to make her feel guilty. I wasn't trying to blame her or anything. I just had to explain what was going on, and I just said, I know you had it too, Mom. And she finally admitted it, and then she told me about how her father scared her, and she sat at the dinner table and it admitted that. But that's how that conversation came up with my mother.
Gotcha. And did she take any steps to try to deal with it, or just kind of live with it?
The only thing she knew how to do, and what most people did in the past before therapies and treatments and everything else, was to drink alcohol. And that was how she dealt. And I noticed, she could be around people when she was drinking, but much more comfortably. And
well, it's the thing about alcohol is it kind of helps to a certain point, but it can also, I feel like, weaken the nervous system, such to the point where you're almost like you can get angrier quicker, like you're less in control of your reactions. And so,
well, at first it's just
there's always a tipping point.
Yeah, it is. It's a funny thing.
It takes the edge off at first, but
exactly, you feel good for a while, for an hour or two, whatever. As long as you keep drinking, things don't bother you as much. And that's what I liked about alcohol when I was younger. Things didn't bother me. I could be around people eating, and it didn't bother me. But as it progresses, it's terribly addictive, and it's physically harmful, mentally harmful. It makes you depressed. So it's a good temporary fix, but long term it doesn't work. And my father, drinking, started out feeling good at first. He was much more sociable and relaxed, and then as the evening progressed, he became very mean and critical, and turned him into a monster. We used to call him Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because he would become a different person, and a very angry. All the repressed anger that he had finally came out when he drank too much, and he could be volatile.
Yeah, interestingly, I refer to Misophonia as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde as well, because you can definitely turn on a dime if you get.
Oh yeah, you can have a sweet little lady with misophonia sitting there and being very pleasant, and somebody starts chewing in her ear, and she'll just go into a rage, or shut down. Since most of us repress that anger, suppress it, and don't go into a rage, we just kind of shut down and get quiet and moody and stuff.
Yeah. What did your going back to I know we're like I guess an hour and a half since we started. I could keep going on for definitely a little.
Well, as long as you want. As long as you want.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to, before I forget, one thing I wanted to talk about, I guess, your family life growing up and how you kind of dealt with, or maybe didn't deal with as well, like the families that you grew as you were growing up. Did knowing that you had misophonia help you at all in dealing with, I don't know, did having kids or being married, at least at any point, kind of, did you try to temper your reactions? It sounds like there were issues, but I'm curious if you were mindful of that, um, as you were starting families.
But I'm not quite sure. Did I try to temper my response?
I was kind of mumbled that question, but yeah, but basically, how did you deal with misophonia as you were having kids and growing a family? Like, did you try to um, did you try to take stronger steps to kind of like control your misophonia, or was it just something that you couldn't control until maybe more recently?
Uh, Having a nervous breakdown is helpful.
Mm,
There were
hmm
times when
hmm
I just lost it, and I didn't go crazy. I mean, I didn't act it out. I just felt like I
hmm
was having a nervous breakdown, and I would shut down, or I would
hmm
leave a situation. I would have to sell a house to move away because there was a barking dog next door, or I would have
hmm
to get a different house because my kids got older and I couldn't have the kitchen being close to this room or whatever. I had to have more separation so I could eat separately, which I
hmm
did, growing up. And now I live in. You want to hear something funny? We have three homes. We have two in Phoenix. We bought two lots right next to each other, and we have two houses there. My wife and I, and we are constantly back and forth. We don't like having two houses necessarily, but it gives me my own space. It gives me my place to put music on and have quiet and not be in the same kitchen, not be in the same office. And then in the summer, we have one big home with two levels. So I have the downstairs level, but I have my
hmm
own kitchen, office, bedroom, bathroom, TV, everything in the lower level. And we're back and forth, and we prefer being in the one house, but we actually have to live in sort of either two floors or two separate houses in order to make it work.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Wow. Okay.
it's a crazy situation, and it's been taxing on my wife, but she's a saint about this. She's just
hmm
remarkably, not saying she doesn't get upset about it and it affects her, and I hear about it, but she's been remarkably loyal and patient and forgiving with it. And
Has she known about your misophonia?
yeah,
Oh, she must have known about it forever, right?
yeah. Well, we've only been married a little over 10 years. I was married before, so
hmm
the mother of my kids
hmm
is. But she's been really good for the past 10 years. It's been good. I have a good loyal wife, and luckily we're able to find afford to be able to live in separate places so that we can just overlap when we need to.
hmm And do you feel like with the current treatments that you've been starting, are those overlapping moments going easier in any way so
It
far?
Yeah,
Or
it does help. It helps.
yeah.
When I was younger with the kids growing up, it was difficult. It was difficult. I didn't
hmm
have this much space. I was living with the kids, and it was hard. And I think it was harder on the kids. I was stressed out, but I was working a lot, so I wasn't home all that
hmm
much. But with the kids, I know they were stressed, and I think it's had an effect on them, particularly my younger daughter who has misophonia. She's had a lot of
hmm
issues, a lot of anxiety, the misophonia,
hmm
um, social anxiety, other problems, and so it's had an effect on my family, which is heartbreaking for me, very difficult. Luckily, my oldest one
hmm
doesn't have it. She has just a normal life with kids and doesn't seem to have any of the problems that I had. She didn't pick it up. Only my younger one.
Is your younger one? Are you and your younger one able to bond over it or anyway? Does she come to you? Are you able to be around each other, like normal, because you're at least aware?
Another good question. She lives in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Oh, so she's not like young.
oh,
She's a
she's
little bit.
45 years old.
Okay.
Yeah, she's in her 40s. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm 70. She's 40.
Yeah.
Um, she a lot of times has a hard time being around me. I guess I trigger
Mm-hmm.
her. I don't know if it's
Mm-hmm.
the sounds I make or she's overly sensitized to me and my moods. I'm not a moody
Mm-hmm.
person, but growing up with me and knowing all the little things that bother me, I guess she feels it's so stressful that she's so afraid that I'm going to get upset. She's going to do something wrong, make the wrong sound, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I think it's affected her. So I see her every year, but she says it's difficult for her, and she's on medical marijuana. That's how she deals with it.
Ah.
And
Yeah. So I was going to ask, do you know what kind of marijuana is it? There's different kinds of Delta 8, Delta 9, or medical marijuana. Do you know what she uses and if it's helped?
it helps her to function and get by and deal
Mm-hmm.
with the stress and deal with the anxiety that she's always feels and deal with the misophonia.
Mm-hmm.
But it's she uses a very powerful form of THC, and I
Mm-hmm.
mean it's a powerful drug. What they've done to marijuana is not the stuff that they smoked in the '60s. It's
Right. Yeah.
high bred properly, concentrated, and whatever they do to it, and it's a very powerful drug. Probably, I don't think it's good for her, but it's the only thing she says that works for her. So that's what she
Mm-hmm.
takes, and
Mm-hmm.
and while I'm with her, she's like every 10 minutes she's taking a puff because she needs it for her
Oh,
anxiety. It's just
wow.
my father drank, my mother drank.
Mm-hmm.
I used to drink. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Now I exercise like a maniac, but my
Mm-hmm.
daughter smokes marijuana. It's how we've all dealt with this anxiety. My father had anxiety and depression, and he found a way to deal with it. Even my grandfather, my father's father, was a nervous person, but he didn't drink or didn't do any of these things. You could always tell he was kind of a fidgety, nervous person. So I think
Yeah.
it ran in the family. A lot of this is probably generational. My father's father was Jewish, and the family grew up in Eastern Europe under pogroms and holocausts, and he lost his
Oh
family
God.
to the Holocaust. His
Yeah.
parents were murdered in the
Yeah.
Holocaust, and so I think generations of being Jewish in Eastern Europe and the
Mm-hmm.
unpredictability of your life and the persecutions and all that they made that got programmed into to us, and it
Yeah.
got passed on. You have a nervous mother and father, you're going to pick up that nervousness, and it just gets passed on.
What about your friends, like your social life? Do you tell people around you who are not in your family?
I am much more open about it than I used to be because it has a name.
Mm-hmm.
I, I'm involved in the community, and people are much more understanding. But I didn't in the past. I never wanted to bring it up. I'm much more comfortable doing it now. My wife's real good about telling everybody I have it, so she can explain why you can't chew your ice cubes while at dinner table, and people give her a perplexed look, but say, "Okay, I won't chew my ice cubes," whatever. But
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
know, and there are certain people that I unfortunately, nice people that they will have some eating habit. They chew ice. They constantly sip on their a drink. They're noisy eaters. They chew gum, whatever. I
Yeah.
have to avoid a lot of people,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
but I still have a good social life. Luckily, I play pickleball, and it can be social, and it's not a misophonia thing, and I play that all the time, so I
Right.
can be around people, have fun, laugh, and not have
Mm-hmm.
food involved. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
helpful.
And so I mean, I guess without having to like, maybe explain them all, but your triggers are the usual, like mouth, nose, throat related, eating, chewing, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, all the
Yeah.
mucusy
Yeah.
sounds, throat clearing,
Mucousy sounds. Yeah. Yeah.
anything
Yeah. Yeah.
mucusy, anything eating, drinking, dogs, ticking clocks. I have all silent clocks in my house. Um, you know, I've just picked up so many triggers over the years.
Any memorable moments having issues, or maybe somebody reacting to you in a perplexed way, and just you kind of remembering that.
Well, there's been a bunch of them. Unfortunately, I
Yeah,
mean, once I was stuck
yeah,
at a
yeah.
restaurant with a guy for an hour, ate a plate of nachos,
Oh,
and I think that was 30 years ago, and I'm still haven't calmed down from
yeah,
that
yeah.
one. And my wife has a friend, a younger girl that she sort of kind of adopted, and she just has this terrible eating thing. It's a whole thing. It's wrapped up in
Yeah.
she's she plays with her food. She just takes little bites. She makes it. Everybody's done eating, and she's got to continue picking on her food for another hour, and it drives me
Right,
insane.
right.
And it just makes me absolutely insane. And I shut off, and I become numb. I can't feel. I can't sleep. I go into this fight, flight, freeze, and flop. There's four different states you can go
So
into.
yeah, the flop's a new one, but I totally get it. So this is even after the meal has long ended. You're just still in flop mode.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can freeze and just stay there, but you're tensed up. Flop is when your body just goes flaccid. You
Yeah.
go completely dead, and you don't feel anything, and you just shut off. And it's a vagal state, you know, and
Hmm.
it's a
Hmm.
nervous system state, and that's the lowest state. That's really when you get to that lowest dorsal vagal, they call it. When you get to that low state,
Yeah.
it's the only way you can survive is just shut off. You can't even feel anything anymore. And that's a terrible way to be. It's a terrible place to be. You just don't even want to be alive. You wish you were dead.
It's like it's like emotional hibernation or
Yeah,
something.
that's a good
Your
that's a
body.
good
Yeah.
analogy. Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. Well, yeah. I guess. Wow. I guess maybe we can have you on in the future. But any well, while we try to wrap up, any I don't know, recommendations you have for like other books that we've mentioned a lot of things here that I personally find fascinating, books or um, therapies or things that you recommend to people to look into.
Yeah. Well, in that group there, I do put on all the therapies that I do. I have a lot of stuff in there, book recommendations, videos, and stuff for people
Okay,
to
okay,
learn. I have been
yeah,
lately. I've been reading anything by Gabor Mate. The body says when the body says no.
yep,
It's like he talks about becoming a not your true self, becoming a person in order to be loved, which is your primary need, so you survive. You will do anything you can to please people, and you can't say no. You can't say no to helping people. You can't say no to where you feel people may not like you or love you or accept you, and it has a long-term effect. In this book, he talks about the physical ramifications. A lot of autoimmune diseases,
yeah,
rheumatoid arthritis, cancer, other things that eventually, over the years, it takes a toll, and it'll show up if you can't say no to people when you feel like you have to be somebody other than you are. Uh, your body will say no. Your body will react.
hmm,
So
hmm,
he has
hmm,
this. He has so many good books, but this one is when the body says no. Um, the If you want to learn about internal family systems, the IFS, Dr. Schwartz has a book called Internal Family Systems Therapy. It's kind of the Bible on IFS. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating stuff.
yeah, yeah.
I've been reading.
You,
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, near the beginning, you said that IFS is kind of a popular therapy. I had just heard about it in the last year, so
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I feel like it's not well known. It's not well known enough. If I haven't heard about it, and I'm 46 years old. Who claims to be somewhat, um, enlightened on kind of health and mental health stuff. So it might be popular, but maybe in some small circles. It's definitely something I feel like should be shouted from the rooftops.
It is, and it's growing in popularity. And and people are realizing, wow, it really does have validity. It's really helping people,
Yeah.
and it's a form of memory reconsolidation. It, utilizes neuroplasticity and changing the brain and updating it and helping the nervous system eventually, and
Yeah.
and and it's extremely popular and it's growing in popularity. But in order to get training, which is essential to become a certified,
Mm.
there's 3 levels of training. In order to become even get to the first level, the waiting list is like 2 year, 3 years long.
Mm.
Every
Mm-hmm.
therapist, people that are in the field, are learning about it, wanting to do it, wanting to get trained. So it's huge. It's huge.
Is it related at all to somatic experiencing? I think that's another something in that realm.
Yeah. Well,
I think Peter Levine is
right,
kind of a proponent of
right.
that.
Bessel van der Kolk and Peter Levine. Those are the other two guys that I would definitely recommend reading their books. Van der
Yeah,
Kolk,
yeah, yeah.
luckily, his book, was on a bestseller list, so everybody's reading that. But
Mm-hmm.
Levine, not as much. They're more, but luckily, Peter Levine is becoming more and more popular, and his books are popularized now. Another,
Yeah, I've got The Body Remembers on my desk right now by Rothschild. So,
great,
which I was told is like a smaller version of it, basically basically a shorter version of The Body Keeps the Score.
right,
So,
right. So you can see how this intuitively makes sense, and all of the things that they're talking about, the trauma and the stress and the treatments, to you, don't they seem like they apply to misophonia?
absolutely, 100%. And I felt that from as soon as I heard about Gabor Mate and Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah,
But I wanted to kind of like let it kind of absorb in me because I know I could definitely think of experiences, but I'm trying to be um take a I'm trying yeah I kind of wanted to wait and see, do some research because I just want to make sure that, well, I wasn't sure, does this affect everybody, is this universal, um and so yeah, that's why I'm starting to ask more and more people about their backgrounds and do they have these similar issues. And yeah, I mean, I hear about the walking on
yeah.
eggshells kind of
Well,
experiences
unfortunately,
almost all the time.
misophonia is not in the DSM yet, so it's not recognized.
No,
But I think
no,
it'll eventually
right.
fall under the rubric of all of these other conditions that are anxiety, depression, PTSD, and all. It'll eventually fall in with them. We just don't know what to do with it now. It's just like an orphan child that doesn't have a home right now, but it
Yeah.
eventually will fit in as it becomes. As I would love to contact. I'd like to find a way to contact somebody like Gabor Mate or I know we're in contact with Bruce Ecker, who wrote the book about memory
Mm,
reconsolidation. He's very familiar with this, and the woman I'm working with, Morvan, is in contact with him. She works with him and discusses it with him, so
okay.
he's aware of misophonia.
Yeah,
There was
yeah, yeah.
something else I was going to say. Anyway, another book that I've been reading, more fascinating stuff, is by Donna Jackson Nakazawa. She has a book that's been out. She has a couple of them. This one's Childhood Disrupted, and it's a very similar. It's called How Your
Mm-hmm.
Biography Becomes Your Biology and How You Can Heal.
Mm.
So she's got a lot of great information in here. So she's another good one. We've got Gabor, we've got Vanderkolk, we've got Levine, we've got Schwartz,
Rothschild, and
Rothschild. Yeah. So there's a lot of good reading to do.
there's a lot of stuff out there, and I feel like it's still. Yeah, I was like, why did it take me 45 years to find out about it? So hopefully this is just on the up and up. Oh, and speaking of like just other than nonfiction, have you seen these kinds of things addressed in like fiction or theater or film or music?
I've Somebody just mentioned. I was watching a Netflix program the other day, and they were talking. Some guy was chewing on nuts, and this woman was saying, "Have you heard of misophonia?" And he's like,
Oh yeah,
"I forget.
that
I,
was
I
right.
forget.
Yeah, now I forget what the name of that. I did go and watch that scene. I think it was on FX or something like
Yeah, it
that.
was something. I was watching it.
Old Man or something like
Oh
that.
yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. You're right. That's right. That's the one it was. Yeah, yeah. I was surprised when I hear that. I was like, oh my gosh, people know about this now. And there are celebrities, and I know there's somebody getting her name.
Sarah Silverman.
Who?
Well, Sarah Silverman has it, and she talks about it
Oh,
openly on her
oh yeah,
podcast. But
she
also
does.
Kelly Ripa and
Kelly Ripa
whatnot.
has for a long time, but we're trying to get in contact with them so we can discuss it with them. Maybe even have them come to the convention. I'm not part of the convention, but the more you can get a celebrity involved, the more exposure you'll get and the credibility you get. So it'll be nice to get to some of them out there talking about it. It's just a matter of time. Over time, people will know more about it. It'll be accepted. We'll try to figure out what to do with it, where it fits in. It's a long process.
Yep. Well, Michael, you're doing a lot. I want to say, thanks for everything you've done and are doing and are sharing here and in the Facebook group. I definitely will get off and try to find it again and try to get in. But yeah, I think this is a mountain of information here in this episode, and I'm glad to finally talk to you, and hope we can keep in touch.
Good. Oh, for sure.
It seems like we have very similar thinking.
Yeah.
In terms of where this is going.
I
feel validated.
Good. I'm glad, because I feel validated. I feel like I'm not the only one that thinks trauma has something to do with this. I've got a lot of kickback when I'm accusing people of being terrible parents, and that's not the case at all.
I've been getting that recently too, and it's memorable, but I mean, I remember those moments, and so so it gives me pause, but then
exactly.
But then I feel like so I kind of watch my language a little bit, but I feel like it is definitely there's something here.
Well, and, we have to be not take it personally. We have to look for the truth,
right.
Even if it might hurt at some point.
Yeah.
Whatever, you have to face this with clear eyes and not take it personally, and whatever it is what it is, and we have to face it honestly.
Wise words on many regards. So
sure.
Thanks again, Michael.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate you having me on, and I hope you can filter this, edit this thing down to something presentable for your podcast.
Oh, I will. Thank you, Michael. This was another classic that I'll be listening back to for a long time, I know. If you also like this episode, don't forget to leave a quick review or just hit the 5 stars wherever you listen to this podcast. You can hit me up by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or go to the website at misophoniapodcast.com. It's usually easiest to send a message on Instagram at Misophonia Podcast. Follow me there, or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast, or Twitter at Misophonia Show. Support the show by visiting the Patreon at patreon.com/Misophonia Podcast. Theme music, as always, is by Moby. And until next week, wishing you peace and quiet.